Hi everyone again. Zach and I were going to present today on the topic of techniques and considerations for improving accessibility in online media. Next, please, Zach. So first of all, I would like to define digital accessibility. So digital accessibility refers to how usable a website, app, or other digital experience is by all possible users, regardless of their ability or disability. However, it's important to take into consideration that 1 in 4 adults in the US have some type of disability. So there's still a lot of work to do in order to make a digital experience accessible to everyone. Next, please. I would also like to add that accessibility and providing accessible content is a legal requirement. I'd like to just briefly mention here the Americans Disability Act, or ADA, that prohibits any discrimination against people with disabilities and ensures that they have the same rights as anyone else. Also, Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act requires federal agencies to ensure that electronic and information technology is equally accessible to people with disabilities. And Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act defines the rights of individuals with disabilities to participate in programs and to benefit from those programs. Briefly, what does it mean for federal agencies? It means that they must ensure that all published electronic information is compatible with assistive technologies or technology devices that are commonly used by people with disabilities. And also, I would like to speak also in relation to this question of legal requirements about the web content accessibility guidelines. It is an international standard because the United States obviously is not the only country that would like to improve accessibility. So it's an international standard, and those guidelines, they rate accessibility of websites worldwide. And under the updates of the Section 508 in 2018, I guess, so all the websites of federal agencies have to comply with those guidelines. Next, please. So speaking about most common accessibility issues, we are going to discuss alt text shortly, but still it's worth mentioning that it's one of the main common accessibility issues, inappropriate alt text on images. And so definitely the solution is to keep them to the point, short and descriptive. The second most common accessibility issue is poor contrast text. And it's important to take into consideration that poor contrast on websites makes it hard for users with disabilities to identify the edges and shapes of several components. That's why it's important to remember to keep the text to background ratio to 4.5 to 1, but also to, if possible, to use a color contrast checker. The third issue is heading hierarchy, because website users with disabilities hardly ever read an entire web page. So the majority of screen readers, they use headings to navigate any websites. Hence, it's important to keep heading logical. And then the fourth one is too many navigation links. So again, cluttered navigation links, they present a common accessibility issue, and users with visual impairment, for example, follow the navigation when they load a new web page. So we need to make sure that no not well-coded navigation links are used. So the following one is using non-descriptive links, such as read more or click here. And so links need to be descriptive, and they need to correctly describe where the link can go. Another one is lack of keyboard accessibility and navigability. And so some people with disabilities, or users with disabilities, they are not able to use a mouse, for example. So this needs to be taken into consideration. Another issue is embedding inaccessible documents. And so it's to make we need to make sure that documents are accessible to everyone, and for this, an accessibility checker can be used. And the last one I'm going to speak about now is lack of subtitles and captions to videos. And a solution to this would be using voice recognition software. Next, please. So I would also like to briefly define alt text or alternative text. It describes what is in an image, and it is read to users out loud by screen reader software. It is indexed by search engines, and it is displayed on the page if the image fails to load. The typical length of an alt text is 100 to 125 characters, and it's always important to keep in mind that the context is important while writing an alternative text. Next, please. So I would like to give you this simple example of an image, and of well, actually three examples of an alt text for this image. The first one is an okay alt text, man on escalator. Why is it okay but not good enough? It's because there is no enough detail describing this image. A better one would be man walking on escalator, so we add another description, and the best one would be man wearing backpack walking down escalator. So basically describes the most important features here. Next, please. And speaking a little bit more about context and its importance, I would like to also show this example of an alt text for a web page about student success. So if we would like, for example, to describe the impression or emotion of this image, a new graduate at commencement, alt text would not be enough. We need more details in relation to, this topic of student success. That's why a graduate from the College of Health and Human Services smiles widely as he walks with his new diploma at commencement would be a better one, or a good one. And now I think that Zach is going to continue presenting. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Olga. Okay, so when I first started using alt text, particularly on Twitter, one of the things I was a bit confused about was the difference sort of between what a figure caption is versus an alt text. So caption, is typically displayed by an image, and where an alt text is not necessarily visible. So essentially, if someone is using something like a screen reader, then it would be able to sort of detect the alt text. But something else that's interesting is, let's say for some reason a website image doesn't appear, then actually the alt text will then become visible even though the image isn't there. And sort of the difference is that, as Olga mentioned, you provide a lot more descriptive context for the alt text. So the caption is just sort of, a very sort of vague description per se, where the alt text is actually giving a more descriptive, encounter of what is actually being displayed in the picture. So I wanted to go through on some ways that, you can include alt text. There's many different types of settings that it's actually now quite widely used on the internet, but the settings are very hard to get to. So starting off with Twitter. So I just took some screenshots of sort of, the process that I use to include it for graphs and images. And first off, I wanted to show this sort of warning message. So I'll show you how to turn on this setting in a minute. But essentially, if I try to tweet in anything with a movie, a GIF, or an image, and I do not include alt text, it actually brings up this sort of pop-up window that says, did you forget, to add some alt text to make this image accessible? And, do you want to include it sort of yes or no? And one other thing that's interesting, so I mentioned, alt text isn't necessarily visible if you're not using something like a screen reader, but on Twitter, you can actually see this information. So if you look at this image here, and down below, it's saying that it's a GIF. I don't know if you can see my mouse or not, but this is an animation, but next to it on images where people have used alt text, you see this little thing where it says ALT. So if you actually click on that, and you can do this for anyone who has a sort of included alt text for their images on Twitter. And you can actually see what the description looks like. And it gives you a really good idea if you're sort of struggling to see examples. So I definitely see really good examples of alt text and other ones where it isn't really useful at all. So to sort of how to go about including this in a tweet. So I'm just pretending I'm tweeting a graph here of methane here on the left-hand side. So at the top here where what is happening, that would be your typical where you're going to add the tweet. And then I've added this image here of a graph of methane. And then down below is this tag people option where you can just sort of tag other accounts. But to the right side of that is something called add description. So it doesn't necessarily say alt text, but add description, that's what it's referring to. And when you click on that, you're going to get this sort of pop-up window, which is really nice because they actually have a sort of nice website. Twitter used to have a really big accessibility team. I don't know if they're still around, but they actually had quite a big team working on improving accessibility for Twitter. So then you can just write in the description this alt text up to 1,000 characters. And one of the challenges I think for using alt text for social media networks is it's very much hidden in the settings. So to give you an idea of how hidden it is, if you sort of go into Twitter settings, there is an entire tab called accessibility, display, and languages. So you can click on that, and then you'll go to, those different categories. And then if you click on accessibility again, there are actually quite a few of these different accessibility options. We focused on alt text here, but like Olga said, accessibility in media is a much bigger topic. So if you sort of scroll down to media, then you can add sort of this reminder in case you forget to add alt text with your images. So some other websites, Mastodon has become an alternative for a lot of people in science and research and others against Twitter right now. So Mastodon also has an alt text option. They also sort of refer to it as adding text description. So if you're going to add a message on Mastodon, like on the left-hand side, there's sort of this no description added. And if you just click on that, then this window pops up where, again, you can type in your alt text. They actually have some sort of AI where you can actually try to generate alt text describing the image by clicking this detect text from picture. I've tried it before and my computer sort of overheated when I tried it, so I have not been successful, but it might be something worth exploring to see how well it does if you don't want to write it yourself. Instagram also has alt text, so anytime you post a picture or reel, I guess is what they're called, you can add alt text to that, but unfortunately it's super hidden in the settings. Like Twitter, Instagram also has a very big accessibility sort of menu with a lot of different information. And if you can navigate to finding that, they actually give different settings, but unfortunately there's different settings for what type of sort of, whether you're using an Android or iPhone or whether you're on the computer or not. So it is complicated, but it does exist. And I've tried to get better about adding alt text even to my own sort of personal Instagram. Similarly, Facebook has their own accessibility tab. And if you can try to navigate through the very complex settings on Facebook, you can then see that you can again add alt text to any images on Facebook like Instagram and Twitter. I just wanted to mention that alt text is also a popular feature on websites. So if you use websites like Wix and WordPress or anything that really uses HTML has the opportunity to add alt text. So I just wanted to show sort of a screenshot from my own website. I use WordPress. So what I've done here is just take a picture of me uploading this image I've added here. So there's a figure caption down below after you upload the image to WordPress. And then there's also a whole alt text option. And like all of these other websites, they also sort of have tutorials that you can click on to get sort of suggestions and guidelines on adding alt text. And then this feature will be embedded with the image anytime you use it throughout the website. And if you're really into coding, I know there's a lot of text here, but I just wanted to point out that you can actually add HTML code that includes alt text. All it essentially is ALT equals, and then in quotes, you can type the alt text. So instead of, adding it manually when you upload an image, you can also embed it in HTML and other types of sort of website design coding. One thing we kind of want to end on, the idea group has really focused on, what types of other topics could we give sort of short trainings on during these board meetings for anyone? And I guess I'm kind of volunteering myself if there's any interest in this. If not, no worries. But I give a presentation on how to make accessible figures, science figures. So like for both science figures for science communication and also for research publications. And I'll just point out, some of the things, some of these also overlapped with what Olga said about thinking about color contrast. One thing we often think about is sort of colorblind friendly color schemes, but there's actually an entire science of making accessible science figures that goes well beyond just thinking about color blindness. Other things to think about if you like using animations or memes, it's really important not to use very flashing GIFs. Other things that I have recently been practicing with is figure titles. So instead of just, I'll give an example. I post a lot about sea ice. So instead of just using a title called sea ice, use a title that is more descriptive of the graph. So I would write, instead of just saying Arctic sea ice, I would say Arctic sea ice is declining. So using sort of figure titles as a way to sort of help guide the user through the image. So again, if anyone is interested in this, I'm happy to sort of talk about this further in the summer or next year. So just some sort of concluding thoughts is we focused a lot on alt text because it's a really simple way, but it's kind of hidden within our settings and it takes a lot of practice to get better at it. Also, there's, this media accessibility is definitely a growing area. There are a lot of different things beyond, like Olga mentioned, beyond alt text. And again, we all can sort of revisit this. I think one thing that I want to think about now, after going through some of this background to make these slides, is thinking about navigation for website tabs and making sure you don't have too many tabs to navigate through your websites. But again, alt text options are basically available for any time you post an image through social media or on the internet. There is some sort of alt text setting, but sometimes it can be hard to find. One last thing that I see happen quite a bit, especially on Twitter at least, is forgetting alt text. I mean, we all forget, that's okay. But sometimes people will then reply to the tweet, like have a tweet and then reply to it with another tweet and then type the alt text in the tweet. But that's really not helpful in the way that the screen readers operate. So again, I recommend sort of turning on this reminder feature on Twitter. And I think we will end there. We're going to go into a breakout room now.